Qualities needed to reconnect with family. Episode 4, Vulnerability. Part of the series, Conflict Resolution Insights from Brett Lovett, The Compassion Project, and FamilyReconcile.com.
Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer as cases are fact-dependent.
Hello and welcome to our Lawyers and Mediators Instant Mediations podcast. I am Natalia Łowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
Hi, I'm Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas.
And I am Brett Lovett, founder of FamilyReconcile.com.
Thank you for coming together with us today to discuss an interesting topic, which is vulnerability. And when I think about vulnerability, I do believe it is not something that people would perceive at the first glance as something necessary in life in the current times, which expose us to many situations where we need to prove to be strong, to be leading, to be the ones who are decisive. It seems like neither in work or in our family life, there is a place for vulnerability. Because a lot of people do think about vulnerability as a quality expressing weakness. I do believe the best way to start talking about vulnerability, therefore, is to ask Brett about the definition of it. What is vulnerability?
So there are a number of definitions that are out there. Here's one that I think encapsulates it well. It's uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So when you think about that uncertainty, you think about risk and you think about emotional exposure, it's no wonder that people, whether they know that definition or not, would think it probably to be quite an unattractive quality.
So, Brett, go a little further because this word is coming up now a few episodes into the series after we spoke about deference, after we spoke about gratitude, and after we spoke about humility, because those virtues or those qualities are things that family members or just everyday old people need in order to build bridges of understanding and to have closer relationships, especially closer relationships with people who they might have had a falling out with. And so how does vulnerability exist as a good follow-up to deference, gratitude, and humility?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. We don't just randomly, or I'm not just randomly picking these qualities out. They tie in with one another. Vulnerability is a good topic after discussing deference and gratitude and humility, because we're talking about mindset. Vulnerability is a lot about our mindset. And I don't think people know, or I don't think when they're thinking about vulnerability, they say, "Oh, I'm experiencing vulnerability," or "I think I'm being," they sense it. I don't know as if they necessarily would call it that, but we've all experienced it. That's the point. So whether you're aware of it, whether you define it, we've all experienced it. When you're about ready to say "I love you," when you're about ready to try out that new skill in front of everybody, when you're about ready to ask for forgiveness, it's those feelings, right, that you experience prior to doing that. What are you experiencing? What are you recognizing in yourself? You're recognizing that you may be laughed at, and you may be criticized, and you may be rejected. And that's risk, and those feelings are real. And that's what vulnerability, that's at the core of vulnerability. So we'll discuss, well, why in the world would anybody even want to, use this quality.
Thank you for that. I always thought that people are simply afraid of showing vulnerability because of how it is being perceived. I do believe that a lot of people would say that vulnerability is something for women, not for men. And I don't believe that this sort of division should go through genders. It's really something more deep about the mindset we present towards other people. But the thing that we're afraid of is ourselves and what sort of perhaps damage that is what some people would think, what sort of sacrifice that would bring in us in order to show it to other people. I do believe that the fear of being vulnerable comes because people perceive it as a cost in a relationship. This is how they perceive, if I'm to be vulnerable, that's going to cost me. That's going to happen at my expense. So is it a strength that we see, or is it a weakness? And why is it that we see it differently in others than we see it in ourselves?
Yeah, those are nice thoughts. Why? I haven't seen research on this, but I would guess and tend to believe that women are more inclined to be vulnerable than men are. Again, I don't have facts or figures on that, but my guess would be it's not that it's an easier quality, but it's a quality more women are more open to it than men are. And there's a bunch of social, psychology probably behind that, which would be for another discussion. But why do we shy away from it? It's a lot like the other qualities that we discussed. Not so much gratitude, but like deference and humility. Remember we talked about when we see that in other people, we celebrate it. And we think it's wonderful to see, and it's an act of courage in others. But when it comes to applying it to ourselves, it's too risky. I'm too exposed, which is what they're hitting on. They're hitting on the vulnerability of the quality. The quality exposes me to vulnerability, and I'm not comfortable with that. You talked about it in the opening session too, Natalia, where you were in your opening comments about, society is, or Mac did, society's kind of geared the other way. Society's not geared towards vulnerability. Society's geared towards, protection. We protect ourselves. We don't expose. It's too risky. So why is it so difficult? It was because, why is it so unattractive? Because all people, I think, really see are the risks involved in hopefully here, as we build out the discussion briefly, we'll just be able to touch or highlight on if there's anything else there other than risk. And I think I think people would at least like to hear it and then consider whether that changes their viewpoint of vulnerability. There's been a lot more research lately in the last decade or so on vulnerability, and what that research shows or kind of pinpoints is that when people see vulnerability in others, they applaud it and they celebrate it as a strength and is courageous. And again, when it comes to themselves, not so much. So how does a person, much like we did with the qualities of humility, they're viewed the same way. So a person pretty much sees, yeah, it's okay, in layman's terms, it's okay for you to apologize. You should apologize for that. That's the right thing to do. But if I do, you see, I might lose my job, or I might lose this role or this position, or I might lose this romantic relationship, or I might lose, or my family relationships may suffer. So it's okay for others. This is what the science shows, but not for us because it's too risky.
So as you were talking, just some topics that kind of came to mind, and I'd like for you to then go and give us some reasons as to why or how being vulnerable might be a good thing. But I go back in my mind to 5th grade, where my teacher brings us all around a table, and I think we had like a class rat. No, probably was a gerbil. Okay, it was a small little rodent, and so she placed this animal at the center of the desk. We're all standing around it, and she lifts her hands up, and it runs to the edge of the table, and it just keeps navigating around the edge of the table in order to, now that I understand, in order not to be exposed, in order to have protection, in order to escape from any potential threats. Okay. I mean, this poor creature probably looks at us, all these big kids looking down at it. But that image always stayed with me, since I was a kid. And of course, I see this in my own pets, and whether it's my cat or my dog in the cage that it runs to whenever it hears a loud noise. So these things apply to us as well, psychosocially as human beings. We don't want to be hurt, right? It's almost like vulnerability is a form of escapism, where it's a way for us to avoid getting hurt further, especially when you hear it in somebody, let's say they have gone through a very difficult relationship and they were hurt in that relationship and they're afraid to enter into another one, right? So, or somebody in a family context, we're talking about families reconnecting. Someone has been hurt by a loved one, someone who's supposed to love them, like a parent who's supposed to love you, and you grow up and you were wounded by that. And how difficult might it be? You're not going to want to make yourself vulnerable to that person again. So in that context, I think my rational mind is thinking, wow, vulnerability seems to be a proper defense mechanism, whether you're the rodent on the table or my dog who runs to its cage or a person who was abused by someone who was supposed to show love to them. So help us understand then where are the benefits and how else should we think about vulnerability?
Yeah, well said. The in a relationship context, because that's the primary focus of our show here. Although, as you mentioned, we really want to apply it in the family, and then apply it in everyday life with all of our relationships. But vulnerability is this in the family or in any relationship. It's the courage. It's the courage to say, "I love you." It's the courage to say, "I apologize." It's the courage to ask for forgiveness without a guarantee. That's a key point. So we discuss quite a bit of information over these 20-minute programs, but I always try to get one or two key points. And this is one right here, is understanding that is what vulnerability is. It's taking the first step. It's taking the initiative. And that's where the exposure is, because you don't have a guarantee, because our minds want predictability. Our minds want to say, if I go out on a limb, it's okay for others to go out on a limb, right? Not necessarily for us to go out on a limb. So if I go out on a limb, I want to be able to predict the outcome. Well, vulnerability doesn't allow for that. Vulnerability is just the courageous act of going out on a limb without a guarantee. So then somebody would say, okay, Brett, so what you're telling us is to put ourselves at risk, for no guarantee. So let me be clear. Is there risk involved when you express or when you allow for vulnerability? Not just showing your strengths, but also exposing your weaknesses. Is there risk involved? Absolutely. But I think what most people do, or why they shy away, or why it's such an unattractive quality, is because they stop there. It's too unattractive. But what they need to do is they also need to consider the absolute massive benefits to that, which you highlighted there. Before I actually go into, okay, here's a benefit of vulnerability. I was thinking, I was at Strauss Institute and I was attending some dispute resolution programs, and we did some game theory. Maybe you've even done this, the two of you. So there was this game on X and O. So the X was an aggressive adversarial move. That's what it represented, an X card. Okay. And then they had an O card, and an O card was a compromise or a neutral or passive play. And so the theory was they would pick, two people to match up. One would play whatever card they wanted to play, and then the other would play their card. So at first, all you saw was X card. X card, other player, X card, X card. We played 2 or 3 games until finally at one point, and why is that? That if you're playing an X card, why would you play an O card? Because that's going to leave you vulnerable. You're opening yourself up. You're exposing yourself to be taken advantage of, right? So the game's kind of highlighting how we think as humans when we approach these issues. So 3 games or so into it, interestingly, it was a woman. I'm not saying anything about why that is. I'm just saying, interestingly, it was a woman attorney. She played an O card. So we went like 3 back and forth, X card, and then she played an O card. And I thought, oh, wow, finally an O card, and I'm expecting the gentleman, the other attorney he plays an X card. And I sat back in my chair and I went, what in the world is he thinking? Why would you do that? But as I think about that, and I'm thinking about these qualities, I go back and thinking about these things in my past, and he had a whole philosophy as to why he did that. He says, if I play an O card, back to that, my job is to get the best for my client. And he goes, I take that. My client told me to get this. If I play an O card here, I'm not going to get that. So then I start thinking, wow, there's all these other pieces and elements in this whole dynamic. So it's good. It's good to think about this, yes, in the family relationship. It's good to think about it as mediators and attorneys, playing these X cards and these O cards. When are you vulnerable? When is it okay to be vulnerable? So he plays an X card. She plays another O card. So what did she do? She played an O to an X and then an O again. She exposed herself or exposed her client. Maybe they took a hit. I don't know what the hit would be because it would be representative of the circumstances. The point is, that was a courageous move. It was a courageous move. And playing an O card there's no guarantee, because we talked about that's what vulnerability is. It's making moves, taking the initiative, taking the first step with no guarantee to see possibly if you can find a better outcome, if you can encourage and foster that same mentality or approach in the other person. So I just reminded me of that game that we played at Strauss there. That's a lot of how we approach life and how we approach these situations in the family. If I do this, I'm playing an O card and I'm exposing myself to hurt or risk. If I say I love you and they don't love me back, if I say I'm sorry and they don't accept that, I'm risking too much. I understand that. What are the benefits of that, though? So let's just say it as it is. You may lose relationships. You may lose family relationships. You may make a mess of your reputation. But you also may gain associations or relationships that you never would have had before. And you may strengthen family bonds to a degree that you never experienced before. Those are the benefits of vulnerability. That is what vulnerability, yes, it exposes you to, but it also opens you up to this great healing and great awareness. Once you stretch your mind, you can never go back to the former shape. And that's what we're trying to do through these qualities and in this understanding, is stretch our mind that, yes, it's uncomfortable. Vulnerability is uncomfortable. And I'm not sure I like it. And there's a downside. And nobody can guarantee. And my mind likes to predict. But here's the benefit. I may be keeping myself from a world I would have never gotten to otherwise, relationships I could have never attained to otherwise, feelings and a strength of bond in wonderfulness that I could have never gotten to otherwise. That's the benefits of being vulnerable and, by extension, fostering vulnerability in others.
Listening to what you've just said, Brett, also makes me think about gratitude. You say that gratitude is this sort of feature that makes us pay forward. That is, in a way, the side effect of gratitude is that if we express gratitude, we are very likely to get some sort of gratitude back, even if it is not desired or expected, because we are not showing gratitude in exchange of anything. And I am thinking if vulnerability works the same way, but apart from that, I was also thinking, whether it really is only the affirmative act, taking the first step. Isn't vulnerability also sometimes staying inactive and making other people, let us say, vent off or express their feelings, even if these feelings are rough? And your vulnerability would then consist of just sustaining it calmly, listening to them, and only them giving some comments or thoughts. Do you think this sort of attitude is also vulnerability? Because it does expose us to a lot of things.
It does, and that's well said, and I think you're correct. Vulnerability, when you show it, is basically a release of power. One of the studies showed that people don't like vulnerability because they feel they're giving away power. Right. So you absolutely, that's an absolutely applicable illustration there, that it could be remaining quiet. It could mean letting somebody else do something, because you're not trying to control, and you're not trying to maintain a power position. So yes, to answer your question.
And just like Natalia connected vulnerability to gratitude, are connected to humility, which is what we recently discussed. Coming to somebody and opening yourself up requires a certain amount of humility. Okay, not that you are not not valuable, but that you affirmatively treat yourself as not as important as you in your own mind have a right to. So vulnerability, requires that kind of, humble heart. I have a recent situation I was dealing with where I counseled somebody who's been at legal war with her ex for a long, long, long time. And it's gotten to the point where the parties are spending a whole lot of money on the offense and defense strategies of trying to work this case through the courts. But I counsel the person to consider, hey, why don't you send them an offer letter, an offer of settlement? And I can already see the fear in the person's eyes, because that's basically them feeling like I'm asking them to lose some power, because they're going to think, well, when he sees that letter coming from me, then he's going to smell blood. Then he could jump on that. But I was looking at it another way, and that is, well, everything we've been trying so far has not worked. It's certainly possible, remember, this is all confidential and what's written, it's certainly possible that that person may take you up on the offer. They may, or they may counteroffer, but at least it gets the conversation moving. At least it gets people to start making that reconnection, because just going on the on the offense all the time and playing the X card is not necessarily going to help make peace. So we gotta start wrapping up, but please speak to that again as to the benefits of vulnerability.
I mentioned this in probably every one of those other quality sessions we've had. It is, what do you want? That's what it comes down to. What do you want? If you want to be adversarial, if you want to fight tooth and nail to the last, if you want that, then your behavior is going to follow that thinking pattern. Your thought pattern will dictate your behavior. So what do you want? If you're listening to this program or to any of these programs in this series, I don't think you're a person that wants to, I don't think you'd be inclined to want to fight and want to, you may want to stand up. You're trying to figure out, do I stand up for myself, and when is too much, So there's a lot of, I go back to the game. Yeah, you played an X card, you played an O card. That took a tremendous amount of courage to play that O card. And then you get an X card back, and then you play another O card. That tells you the type of person you're dealing with. how could that not foster some sort of settlement agreement in that context? How could that foster not some sort of open communication on a very difficult subject in the family? How could that not foster that? It takes courage to expose yourself to hurt when you're not guaranteed otherwise. And there isn't any other way to, nicely put it. That's what it is. So it's, what do you want? What are you trying to build? Is the relationship valuable to you? Is what you're talking about and what you're dealing with, what's the value in it? Are you talking about children? Are you talking about assets? Are you talking about relationships? What do you want? What you want will dictate your behavior. And if what you want is to do good and do the best you can for somebody else, while not taking advantage of them or being overly taken advantage of yourself, then this is where a quality like vulnerability would come into play. And research has showed, often the problem is we are overestimating the risks and we are underestimating the rewards.
Thank you so much for that. And
Natalia, real quick, I'm sorry, before we close, I recently posted that on LinkedIn about how when we are fearful, we are more likely to see just negative options, right? And so we have to start doubting ourselves a little bit and ask, are we coming from a place in our minds that is fear-based and just wanting to protect ourselves because of that fear? Or are we actually being rational and considering, you know what, there may be other rewards I'm not considering if I change my mindset and start applying some of these qualities in a different way. No one's telling you to go and get abused or become a floor mat to be walked upon. But the opposite extreme of hardness and aggression is only going to produce more hardness and more aggression. That's what my experience been.
thank you so much. And to wrap up, listening to you both and also thinking about this topic of vulnerability deeper, I do believe that one side of these powers and benefits of vulnerability is that it is something that people don't expect. So it might cause a breakthrough, because when you show this vulnerability and expose yourself, even in a fight, most people will be surprised by that. And every single of such surprises opens up new doors and new opportunities, because it stops, suddenly stops someone's aggression, someone's negative attitude towards you. And that is the factor that can make them think. And even if vulnerability achieves that and only that, it's already a success of you showing this quality.
Yeah, that's the essence of vulnerability. I'll just conclude with this comment, because you can see we can speak about this, for a long time. Remember, we talked about connection. We're hardwired for connection. The neuro part of us is about connection. We seek connection. So why is vulnerability so difficult for us? Why is it a hard concept for us to grasp and practice and see the value in? It's because we're risking what's most important to us, and that's connection. But what we might be failing to recognize is we might be, again, as I said, overestimating the risk and underestimating the rewards, because the rewards are the creativity, the innovation, and the type of relationships that far exceed what we had before are birthed out of vulnerability, out of vulnerableness, vulnerable situations we put ourselves in, whether it's in a legal setting, whether it's in the family setting, in any relationship setting. So it's about connection. So why are we talking about vulnerability? And if we walk away, what do we walk away with? We need connection. We're afraid of it because we're afraid of losing it. But what we're not realizing is vulnerability will give us connections we could have never dreamed of before.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all that were listening and watching. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye for now, guys.